level, it's just a state level. It just says that if you have a license in Massachusetts and you're insured, have liability insurance in Mass, and you go to Rhode Island, they have to cover you. It's a good thing. Act relative to student safety and interscholastic athletic activities, just one of the other many bills. It requires school departments to have athletic trainers. That's a good thing, right?
You said that's just for MIAA.
Say that again?
Just for MIAA, or does that apply to all?
It's hard to tell. And the reason it's hard to tell is the language requires the school district to employ an athletic trainer. So it really comes down to the municipal structure. So is an independent school, private school, part of a school district? It's not clear. And that's the problem with laws. It's all about words and language. So let's look at some of the current statutory regulations. Why do athletic trainers work and exist and have rules in Massachusetts? So this is talking about the state cases and laws, government agencies. So this right here, Mass General Law, Chapter 13, Section 11A, was passed 32 years ago, and it creates the board or the ability of the state to regulate athletic trainers. In doing so, it defines a couple of key things. It defines what athletic training is and what an athletic trainer is. That's a statute. It's in the actual state statute. Those things are defined. It also, in statute, Chapter 12, gives the legislators the right to create the Board of Allied Health and gives the authority of the Board of Allied Health to create rules and regulations. So those guys that sit up in that nice pretty domed house in downtown Boston that just gave themselves a raise for working like 8 months a year, and of those 8 months they're actually in their offices like 4. They create the laws, but they don't want to do the work, so they tell a government agency, the Department of Public Licensure, which is a massive government agency, you now can regulate athletic trainers. And that board that's created in the Department of Public Licensure, or professional licensure, creates rules and regulations. That's what the board does. That's the board I sit on, and we have the authority to do that. Keep in mind, the first rules and regulations were created 30 years ago when this passed. And for the most part, they haven't been changed since. It's an incredibly difficult political process. So let me ask you, is Massachusetts a good place to be an athletic trainer? To work, to live, to thrive? What do you think?
It's probably not right. A lot of you guys have done stuff in Rhode Island, right?
You must have an opinion. You've been doing it for a while. How many of you live, born and bred in Massachusetts? You're going to stay here? Ooh, not so many. Is this a good place to be from an athletic training perspective? It's cold. Nothing worse than this time of year. Try playing baseball. It's the worst. That's it? It's just because it's cold? Yeah.
Cost of living is too high for what.
Okay, so how about as an athletic trainer?
Right.
Think about your practice. Think about the things you've seen. High schools, colleges, clinics, hospitals. Is this a good place to be an athletic trainer? You think so? Why?
There's some good hospitals.
Okay.
There's a lot of schools.
A lot of schools.
Some states that don't have a lot of schools.
Okay. All good kind of general things. What about your practice? What you can do, what you can't do, how hard it is to do it. The amount of education, what you have to do to be licensed, your chances of being sued, your understanding of boundaries. That's what I'm talking about, your practice. Sure, it's cold. It's cold in Minnesota. People work there too. Sure, cost of living's high. We're also, 2 weeks ago, Massachusetts #4 in the country for best places to live. So we can't be all bad. But what about your practice? Or maybe the question is, do we understand enough about the rules and regulations to know if it's a good thing or not? And that's the scary thing. Because there's only one person responsible for your practice as an athletic trainer. And guess who that is? Yeah. You can't blame it on the AD. You can't blame it on your doctor. You can't blame it on the school. You can't blame it on the laws. You have to know. And you have to actively build your practice in a way that protects you from the things that maybe aren't clear. You need to avoid the things that are clearly not appropriate. And then somewhere in between, there's this whole slew of things that are kind of hard to tell. And the fact that it's hard to tell isn't an excuse for you not knowing. I mentioned that the state legislators created the laws, the statutes that govern your profession. This is it. This is the entirety. This is every word, with the exception of a little bit on my next slide, that tells you what an athletic trainer can or can't do in the state of Massachusetts. And if you don't know, how hard could that be? You have to seek it out and read it. So what is an athletic trainer? Any person who is duly licensed in accordance with this section of athletic training, and I highlighted the critical words, and I underlined the pivotal words, who limits his practice to school, teams, and organizations with whom he is associated, and who is under the direction of a physician or a dentist. That's it. That's our definition of who you are, or hopefully will be soon. Do we like this? You're not committing, you're not sure, you got a couple yes-no nods, I got a... What do you think?
Well, ideally we'd like to work with more than just athletes pertaining to our team, like in another, like an outside clinic, be able to do more athletic training stuff.
So, say that again. So you're concerned with the fact that
We're limited to working with only the like athletes of our teams or like associated with the school we work with.
Very broad and limited statement.
Yeah. Is that good or bad? A lot of interpretation here. What does this really mean? From this, can you work at a clinic?
Well,
Yeah,
an
this
organization.
is an
Okay.
organization.
I like your thinking. I like the way you reason. Does clinic fit into an organization? Potentially. What about that word associated? What does that mean?
And that just means you're hired by that,
Sure.
right?
Whatever an association is, and it's not defined here, is it? So what if you work at a clinic, work at a physical therapy clinic and an outreach program, work at Bridgewater High School. Your clinic director says we need to drum up business. I want you to run a running clinic 1 day a week from 7 to 8. We'll advertise. We got lots of runners in the community. We'll run a clinic. You're the athletic trainer. You'll staff it. You'll evaluate them. You'll decide what to do with them. Design care plans. We like that. Can we do that? You like that? Can you do it? Why?
Because it's part of the organization.
Okay? If your patient has to be associated with your organization, does that change anything?
Well,
You have to be
what-
a member of the PT clinic?
That would work. Is there such a thing?
No.
But if you're running it under their name, wouldn't they automatically be associated with it? It's not by.
sees the advertisement, walks in off the street, not necessarily a patient.
They're paying, are they paying for it?
I don't know.
Does that change things?
I don't know.
If they show up, they're associating themselves with it.
You're not right or wrong. This is the problem with ambiguity. This is the problem with law. This is the problem with our practice acts. Everyone's, doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, athletic trainers. There are words that are required to be interpreted. That's what law is. So your job is to seek out the ambiguity and make sure you can defend whichever position you take. So if you decide that it's legal for you to do this, in your opinion, and you're concerned about, what am I stigma? Okay, so I work for the clinic. I'm reasonably confident that if my patient is a member or is being seen by that clinic, that that's some form of an association. In fact, if it's a patient, how many forms do they sign when you check a patient in at a clinic? Maybe one of them says, by virtue of you being a patient here, you're considered an affiliate with this clinic. Well, now you've proven it, and they signed it. But what about that person who walks in off the street? It's a free clinic. I run by it every day. There's a sign, Tuesday, running clinic.
Isn't there an assumption of risk? By not walking on the street and joining in on this clinic, or like when you go skiing on a mountain, you're assuming a risk of injury based on you going skiing.
We're actually going to talk about assumption of risk. And sure, anytime you do something, if you know there's risk involved, you assume that risk. That really has nothing to do with the athletic trainer and this issue of affiliation. So I would argue that someone walking in off the street cold probably can't be treated because there's just no affiliation.
Say sign like a waiver. Like what if they sign a waiver saying like?
So this has nothing to do with the patient. This has to do with your practice. You can only practice legally on people that you're affiliated with. It's not their responsibility. They're not going to get sued. You are. So if you're getting sued for treating someone that doesn't have an affiliation, it's your responsibility to prove that they did. Them waiving the law, it's not even possible. You can't waive a law. It's still on your shoulders. So I would say you demonstrate and create an affiliation somehow. Maybe they're part of the Boston Running Club. You send an email. I'm Jamie. I work at Bridgewater Sports Medicine. We have a great program. We want to be affiliated with your program. Your people are welcome to come anytime. Print it out, stick it in a folder. Is that an affiliation? It's more than if you didn't have it, isn't it?
Couldn't you just like create a sign-up form or something?
Or like consent.
So consent is different.
No, I just
But-
mean like sign-up form, like agree that
Like
you're
you sign up
gonna-
for the clinic.
So again, now we're getting into legal arguments. Is a sign-up form sufficient? Someone's lawyer, if you do harm, is going to argue it's not. It's not an affiliation, it's a sign-up form. Maybe your lawyer could. That's the gray area. So your job is to create the best possible defense for you, having identified this weakness. So the next thing that's in the statute is direction. I would say that this is probably the biggest issue in the state of Massachusetts and the profession of athletic training. As a board member and someone that talks about this frequently, I will tell you the biggest thing I hear, particularly at high schools, is, well, I don't have a team physician. What's wrong with that?
Can't practice.
You can't practice. Perfect. It's not the school, it's not the patient. Your practice depends on working with a physician. Can't blame the school, can't blame the clinic. It's your practice. You can't argue, well, my school physician, he's really a urologist. He comes for football games. You have to be under the direction.
Wouldn't the school be partially responsible for hiring you as the athletic trainer without
No.
providing you a physician to work under?
No.
Why not?
Well, yes and no. It's still your practice. You need to tell the school, and you can't take that job if they don't. So I just want, the reason I kind of hawed there a little bit is, if you remember the little thing about case law, there was actually a lawsuit that was settled in relation to a bigger issue. But one of the rulings had to do with an athletic trainer in an outreach at a high school. There was an injury, the athletic trainer wasn't there, the schools or the family sued the school, the clinic, the athletic trainer, everyone involved, and the courts ruled that, among other things, that the employer in an outreach situation has a responsibility to provide the resources for the employee to do the job. In this case, one of those resources would be a supervising physician. So there is potentially case law that says, yeah, a school should do this, but they're not going to if they don't know. Keep in mind, in Massachusetts, every school by law, Department of Public Health and Department of Education, has to have a school physician. So there's one there. The difference is, they don't have to supervise your practice. That's your responsibility. Finding that doctor who agrees to supervise your practice, who directs you. It's in the statute. So I think a common situation is, there's a school physician that probably works with the school nurse, probably gets paid a lot of money and never comes to campus, signs off on a policy or a policy review here and there about attention deficit disorders and how the nurse can hand out Tylenol. It's safe to say he is not going to say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm responsible for that athletic trainer. Some schools fill that gap with a team physician. The local orthopedist who's a good guy and he wants to see all your patients because, hey, that's a stream of revenue. And he says, I want to be the team physician. And that's great too. But if you don't have a documented way to demonstrate he directs your practice, you're not practicing legally.
What counts as directing my practice?
Perfect. You tell me. This is what we know. Actually, we know a little bit more in the next slide. There are some ways to show that, but there are lots of ways. What might you guess would be direction? How could you show direction?
If you referred an athlete to that person?
So if you sent him an athlete, he sent back a script that says rehab for grade 1 MCL, that's direction. But how many of your athletes don't get a script back to you? All of them.
I mean, wouldn't direction of my practice mean that I can't tape somebody up unless he tells me to?
Correct.
So would I just get a very vague form?
There you go. It's called a standing order. That's one level. Absolutely. My point is, lots of times it doesn't matter how you do it. It's about, would a lay person say, yes, that's that? What is direction? Could be lots of things. But as you build your practice, you develop systems to prove these things. To practice, all you have to do is be part of an organization, be under the direction, and your athletes have to be associated with you. That's it. It also defines athletic training. There's really not much here. It lists a lot of these things that we do: prevention, supportive devices, splinting, bracing, use of modalities. It even lists some modalities. These were the modalities that were commonly used 30 years ago. What about something not in the list?
Laser.
Lasers. Say again?
Ultrasound in there?
Sound. It's ultrasound. Yeah. So don't get caught up in this. What this part does is it actually further defines our patients, athletes. You tell me another medical profession that their patients are defined by a characteristic that they choose to do or have. It's like saying physical therapy can only practice physical therapy on people with blonde hair. It's arbitrary. It doesn't identify a particular area or scope of injuries that we're good at. It assumes that an athlete gets an injury that is specific to something inherent in being an athlete, and we only can do that.
I was gonna say like athletic injuries, but like, I don't know, a lot of times we have athletes that don't hurt themselves in athletics particularly, but come in and get treated
Correct.
because they're still an athlete.
Sure. And in
So it's not an
Massachusetts,
athletic injury technically, but it's
correct.
like-
And you'll see when we actually go through quickly just a couple of other states.
Okay.
And that's even more prevalent there, but that's a great point.
Or like if you're working in like an industrial factory and they hurt
I think
themselves,
they
that's
jump on that
technically not an athletic injury, but they're still.
So let me ask you, you're getting into all great things. Hold for a second so your arm doesn't get tired. Can we work in an industrial setting? These are our parameters.
Organization.
It's an organization. We're going to further define organization. But are your patients associated with you and are they athletes?
They're not athletes.
So can athletic trainers in Massachusetts do work hardening programs?
It doesn't-
What if-
It doesn't say we can or can't.
You work for UPS and they sponsor a softball team.
Only the people on the softball team.
Now you're playing the game. I like the way you think. The last part that's in statute that even mentions or is related to athletic training just has to do, and I love this, if you're not licensed in Massachusetts, you can come here for 2 days and not need a license, provided you're only treating your own patients. I love this, because next time the Yankees come to play the Red Sox, for 5 days, I'm reporting the guy and sending him up the line. That's the law. It's ridiculous, but that's the law. So that's statute. Remember that the legislation also creates the Board of Allied Health, who has the authority to promulgate regulations. These are the regulations. In doing that, they have those broad definitions we just read. And here's the hierarchy. Statute is the top of the totem pole. It's the most